UX Podcast Episode 244.
Hello everybody, welcome to UX Podcast coming to you from Stockholm, Sweden. We are your hosts, James Royal Lawson
and Per Axbom,
with listeners in 194 countries from Bulgaria to Estonia.
Nice. And today we are bringing you, for the first time in a long time, a topic show. You'll have to make do with James and mine voice throughout this episode.
Trying to stick to a particular topic. And that particular topic is going to be icons.
Icons, iconography, pictograms. What are we talking about, really?
Well, we are talking about those little symbols that we, as designers, seem to love to use when we're making interfaces. And what sparked, even though this is not a link show, it was actually a link that sparked a conversation about icons. And we felt like it was time to bring it up. We've talked about icons a fair few times over the years, and usually around hamburger icons, the menu icon that we love to hit as designers, and that one we've brought up in at least episode 57 and episode 201. We talked about it a reasonable amount and the problems surrounding it.
And we've also talked about them from an accessibility perspective, in that it's sometimes hard for people to understand them.
So, why do we use icons?
I suppose, if I talk to designers, there are different answers. One would be they save space. And so when we have moved across to building mobile interfaces, I think a lot of designers saw an opportunity to use icons to give them more space for their design work, to give people more work area space and move the menu to the side, so to speak, but keep access to the menu by allowing people to access it through icons. But icons have been around. It's been the same. If you look at Microsoft Word, the number of icons in the toolbar is just insane. So it's always been something that designers are just love to do, because it creates at least something. That means it's just not just words. It actually creates some sort of experience for the user that sets it apart. So it's a differentiator. So one app can differentiate itself from others by the design and by the design of the iconography, which means that you can recognize apps also based on that. So they serve a purpose of recognition.
Yeah, you're right that the saving space thing is probably the first thing everyone would stick their hand up and say that it's we try to do. And if you go back to, like you said, the example of Word, there's so many functions all available in various toolbars that you couldn't arguably do it any other way than using pictograms and icons.
Yeah, exactly.
And aesthetics, of course. I think the branding, or at least having a homogeneous look and feel to something. Like you're using a particular icon set, or you want all your icons to represent your brand or your feel of your product. That's something as well, which I know we'd all probably list as one of the reasons.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite typical, because as soon as one app changes all its icons, I remember when iOS changed all the icons in the interface. There's an uproar across the internet, and everybody has an opinion about it. So it's very emotional within the design world, which is funny because I don't think it is as emotional amongst users.
No, it's the other thing about what icons are is they often, pictograms or icons, they try to convey meaning through a pictorial resemblance to something else, usually, but not all the time, physical objects.
Yeah.
And that, by having that connection to the real world and not to language, then another advantage that sometimes gets thrown up is the fact they don't need to be translated.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Words need to be translated, and in an interface that usually means an extra cost or an extra step in the whole process. Now, yes, you don't have to translate the words, but that means you're requiring a cultural overlap. If you're dealing with an international product, then whatever picture you're using as the icon to represent something, there has to be a cultural overlap between the countries around that symbol, so that you do create shared understanding. If there lacks a lingual overlap, but that in itself causes an interesting situation, because a lot of symbols have a real load of dubious cultural baggage.
Yeah.
I mean, now I'm thinking about it's not a computer icon, but the Men at Work sign that so many countries still use for roadworks. It's still a man with a shovel and a pile of dirt. We don't have so many women at work signs or person at work signs.
I mean, even related to that, I think one of the most recognized symbols in the world is the symbol for toilet at airports, because, I mean, people from all around the world travel and they need to recognize where the toilets are. But even that one is becoming controversial, as it's often not gender neutral, which means that it's funny. I actually give my students this this exercise in class, where they actually have to redesign the toilet symbol. And it's funny how people sooner or later realize that toilet symbol is actually not the symbol of a toilet. It's people. It's a people symbol, and it's funny how the history of that, how that has become the symbol for toilet, but it's really just humans.
Stereotypes of humans.
Also, but it doesn't represent what it is guiding you towards.
No, you're quite right. I mean, the thing you hear talk about how the symbol for the symbol with the wheelchair that's used.
Yeah.
Does that mean that if I've got a broken arm, can I go in there? So there are good examples of the toilet symbols about context and interpretation. Are they universally understood? Do you really know? I mean, I know that we've joked about the toilet signs in Lisbon airport. That they when we were there a few years ago, so the symbol for the Lisbon toilets, the female toilet symbol is of a curvy, thin woman. It's representing a curvy, thin woman with trousers, or at least not a dress.
Yeah.
See, and a lot of toilet symbols would have a dressed woman, a woman with a dress on. Not saying whether that's right or wrong, but someone had gone round every single sign that we saw in the airport that visit and drawn a dress on it. So that was it's an interesting example of perhaps cultural clash, but also of something maybe not being universally understood. Did they add the dress because because they found that men had gone in because it looked too much like the male symbol, or had someone decided it should have a dress because that's what it's always been like? There's so many questions you don't really know. Yeah. But I think it's a pretty good example of the problem with that claim that everyone understands X icon.
I think the article I read many years ago had come to the conclusion that there are like 2 or 3 icons maybe that could be universally understood, and one of them would be the heart sign. But even then,
now that wouldn't have been one of the ones I was expecting you to say.
Oh, but the thing is, they understand that it means heart. But I mean, the function of it wasn't. I mean, that wasn't what the research was about. So, because that's interesting, because the heart symbol in itself can sometimes be controversial. I remember when Twitter changed from the star symbol to the heart symbol for likes, and people were upset because they didn't love what they were marking. They were just trying to remember it.
Exactly. It implied, suddenly the heart implied a response to the content. Exactly. Whereas before, the star was more attached to favourite, which it was called back then. So it meant saving it, whereas the heart meant expressing a like. Yeah. So they're two different features. The magnifying glass was actually what I thought you were going to mention.
Right.
That's sometimes given as the example of a universal icon, but it really doesn't hold up either. Because I mean, I think I've seen it used a fair bit to mean zoom.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, even on Windows, the inbuilt photo viewer in Windows has a magnifying glass with plus or minus as its icon for enlarging a photo and reducing it. So if you use Photoshop, you'll maybe have a very different understanding of whether that means search or zoom compared to someone else. And I think if you've ever tested anything with children, they don't necessarily have the same understanding of these universal icons as us.
Exactly.
And it's very, very easy to say everyone understands a hamburger icon. Everyone understands the search icon, the print icon, the home icon. Some of the, these are the kind of ones that get thrown up, I think, a lot in conversations.
And even in within context, you sometimes don't understand it. I remember someone telling me about how they were chatting with their mother online, much in the same way that you and I are chatting now via video. And he wanted her to activate video. And so he kept saying, press the camera icon, press the camera icon. I can't see it. Well, it has to be there. And 5 minutes later, she appears on screen with the camera on. And he was like, oh, you found the camera icon. No, I found the fish icon.
Yeah.
Because the camera icon, of course, with the rectangle and the triangular end, of course, looks like a fish to some people.
Yeah. When I'm talking to my mum about getting into settings on her Android phone, I realised that I needed to say the flower icon because she can't make out that it's a cog. It doesn't understand it's a cog. To her, it looks like a flower. And
Exactly.
since then, I kind of look at these cogs that we have for settings everywhere, and I see flowers. So it's difficult. And what I think one of the things they say for this is it's the symbol grounding problem. So this is in cognitive understanding, and this is where we need maybe Stephen Anderson here to talk about it, or someone. But basically, our understanding of symbols, letters in alphabets and so on, and a lot of these symbols, they come from, although our learning starts at birth to recognize some of this stuff. So you are spending an awful long time building up your cognitive ability to recognize these symbols. Now, if again you look at schools and children, first of all you learn capital letters, because the lowercase letters get a bit confusing because they look quite different, some of them, to the uppercase ones. Yeah. And then maybe if your country still does it, Sweden actually doesn't, but if your country still does joined up writing, then that's a third character set that you would try and learn in your country, in your locality. And this takes most of your, we're up to 12 years old, I suppose, when you get to that point where you're really getting quite good at recognizing all this writing. So with some of these icons, if we're talking about glyphs and letters as icons as well, you spend a good chunk of your childhood learning what they all mean, and it's still not always straightforward. You get something presented in a new font, you actually can't tell the difference between certain characters.
Right, exactly. Yes.
Yet we, as designers, seem to think that we can throw out new icons, left, right, and center, and within a few years, we're calling them universal.
I think that's the gist of the problem. What we're talking about really here is that we keep seeing lots of designers saying how understood some of the icons they use are, and I think they are overconfident in how their users actually use those icons. It may be the case that the users are adept at using the interface, but it could be very true at the same time that they don't understand the icons at all. And so we sometimes misunderstand ourselves what job the icon does for the person using the service. Sometimes it's just the recognition that is interesting, whether or not the meaning of the icon is there or not. Maybe sometimes even it's irrelevant.
Yeah. It's the article that actually started off the conversation was about the testing of icons and encouraging you to test your icons, which is completely correct. You should be testing your interfaces and see what response you get. The article in question did actually talk about testing the icons out of context.
Yeah, I think that's what got my attention in that one as well. The fact
me
that
too.
that you really. I mean, I think I've even fallen into this trap sometimes. That I remember working with a chatbot last year, and they were discussing, so which icon should we use for the actual bot, the person per se that you're talking to? Should it be a robot? Should it be the face of a person, a sketched face of a person? And so they set out to actually test all those icons independently of the interface of the chatbot, which of course means they are completely out of context. So what you would get in a study like that or in research like that is an understanding of that icon and what it means to a person without everything around it.
Or you're going to have a question, aren't you, Bear? I mean, that's the thing. When you present those icons, there's going to be a bit of text, presumably above it, which says, choose which of the following best represents X.
Yeah.
So you are creating some kind of context, but it's not the context of the actual interface.
In that case, it was actually done person to person, so we were showing the icons to people. So it's just holding up the image and asking for responses to what they were feeling around it. Which
it's like you get kind of like it's almost like some kind of psychology thing where you're going to get all kind of things about their childhood and kind of
It's like a Rorschach blob, really. So that tells you really nothing about how people respond to that icon within the context of, in that case, it was a health bot, within the context of actually feeling ill, going online, finding a service where you describe your symptoms. You would never understand the icon in the same way when you're doing that as when you're seeing a big, of course, high-resolution image of that icon in a completely different context.
Yeah.
I think we place too much value in the meaning of icons outside their own context.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I've done eye tracking tests, and something which is just to see all the time was people fixate on words and faces. That was something you could pretty much, I could guarantee pretty much. I'd show me a picture and I'd say, oh, that and that they'd look at based on whether it was the kind of keywords of the task they were doing or whether it was a person's face. Icons on the other side, that was more the position of them that was relevant.
Right.
I mean, some listeners out there can maybe even test this themselves. You can switch the icon on a button, but keep its position, and regular users, at the very least, would not notice.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, if you're doing, I work with an enterprise product, which a typical user would be handling like 80 to 120 cases every single day using the system, and they don't think about what's on buttons. They just know where that button is at that point in their flow.
Exactly.
Because they've done it so many times. They're doing it 5 days a week, 80, 120 times a day. It's hundreds of times a week. So that's a lot of muscle memory.
Exactly. That actually makes me, when you were saying there about icons also change meaning, the icon's vicinity, how close it is to other icons, means that it can help take on the meaning. I wish I had a good example, but I know I worked on an interface a long time ago where the distance to the, actually it was a magnifying glass icon to the search field. The distance to the search field made people interpret it in different ways, because when it was too far away, they didn't understand it was a search box. It was something along those lines. But I'm assuming now also, as I'm thinking about it, that if you have different types of meaning icons next to each other, the closer they are, they will mean different things because they help each other take on the meaning of the other one.
Yes, and if we connect back to the symbols at Lisbon Airport, when you see those symbols for the toilets in isolation, it's difficult to tell that the female one was actually female.
Exactly.
It's only when you saw there's a sign where all 4 of the symbols they use are on the same sign. Then the male and female symbols together suddenly become different to each other. You can actually see the difference, and you can start to understand. Oh, right, they've made the female figure curvy. They've added some hair to it, right? But without the male figure to contrast it to, you don't get the same level of understanding.
So what we tend to say in design then is that, to help people fully understand the meaning of icons, if they need to, you also need the label. You need to complement with labels, because when you do that, the meaning of the icon, of course, becomes apparent because you can also read the meaning of it. The problem is that when people decide that, no, we don't have space for that, and so we're going to avoid it. I'm seeing this as a many-part process where you help people understand your interface and then allow them to remove parts that they don't need anymore, such as turning off labels would be an example of that.
But at the same time, the label is essential to have there. You can't not design the label. You can't not think about the label, because from an accessibility point of view, it needs to be included, even if you are turning it visually off.
Exactly. Yes.
There is actually there's very few standards to do with icons. At least in the digital space, we don't have a huge amount of standards to go on. But there is ISO 7001, which is the standard for public information symbols. And that's specific, specifies graphical symbols for signage that's used as public information. You'll recognise things like the exit symbol, dangerous chemicals, all those kind of ones that we see on lorries and things and public buildings. Those symbols are all defined in the ISO 7001 :2007, I think it is, the latest one. But what's interesting, or what was an interesting aspect of that, is for a pictogram to be accepted as part of the standard, they have an acceptance criteria, and it was that 80% of people need to correctly recognise the pictogram, at least, and less than 10% of people can't get the incorrect, so the reverse meaning. So if we take the toilet example again, if you have the symbol for a female toilet, then 80% of people have to be able to look at that and go, that's the female toilet. And less than 10% have to say, that's the male toilet.
Yeah.
I guess that, because 80 plus 10 is only 90. So I guess there's a kind of pot there where people go, don't know. And that's actually kind of maybe okay, because don't know is not the same as being confident it's the opposite.
But even 10% saying the opposite, that's quite a lot.
80% saying the correct thing is pretty high as well, Pat.
Yeah, it is. It's very high.
Yeah. So maybe, but that's actually an interesting thing to take into usability testing.
Exactly.
Can you get that kind of level of acceptance of your icon or understanding of your pictograms and icons when you're testing them? It's a useful thing to bring up in a test. Or to observe how many people do get it.
And I think even then, also you have to start thinking about things like not only the metaphor that you're trying to have it describe, but also what color are you making your icon? Because that also not only plays into accessibility, but I guess certain icons can mean different things depending on what color they are. Because we always use red for warnings, but if the symbol itself means warning and you're using another color, does it still mean the same thing? So there are so many aspects of just this small, tiny thing that are really important, but I think we treat them quite carelessly. We depend on them a lot without really understanding how they can affect people's interpretation or even their feelings towards you, depending on whether you have tested that icon in another cultural context where the icon itself can mean something completely different and even be offensive.
Yeah, again, I'm going on a lot about the Lisbon toilet signs, but one of the issues there, I think there's a Reddit thread about it as well, that because it's a thin, curvy woman, it's like, how does that make people feel who are not thin and curvy? And can it trigger? It could even trigger anxiety issues for someone when they see that symbol and kind of feel excluded by it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we have a lot of responsibility when it comes to designing icons. They're universal icons that span all ages, all languages, and all cultures,
Mm.
that's a big ask. And
It
we need
is.
to be we need to be really careful as
Mm.
designers when we start saying about universally understood icons and
Mm.
everyone knows what a hamburger icon is.
Mm.
Everyone knows what a setting icon is,
Mm.
because they don't.
And we're now venturing even into like a space where we're using icons in communication with all our emojis, and I see that people are making more and more use of even emojis in titles of blog posts, in newsletters, when they're communicating with their users in different contexts. They're adding emojis without considering the effect of that emoji, whether people understand it or not. If the laughing face is really crying, as some people think that it's a tear, or is it crying from laughter, that can have immense consequences for a person trying to understand if you're being ironic or if you're actually expressing care. But people use them again. They love to use them because they're fun and they create attention. And I'm guessing now again you're starting to measure stuff, and it shows that if you have an emoji in the title of your newsletter subject line, it will convert better.
But that's an interesting point. It makes me think of as well the history and how we've applied, or we've kind of put icons into our interfaces. That if we look at the web age, then icons originally, I guess, we were using GIFs and image files that were used in the web pages. Then we went through a phase of using sprites. Do you remember you made those canvases with several icons all in one image?
Oh yes, of course. Yes.
And with CSS, you move the sprite
the
to
visible
the right
area.
Bit, so you only so you just have the visible area in the window, so you see through and move it all around. And then we have a phase, I think, still used in a lot of sites, things like Font Awesome, where you use actual fonts that instead of having letters in them, you've changed all the letters to various symbols. Which I know that has kind of all kinds of weirdness for screen readers, because of course they read it, so you can end up with your icon that's filled in the slot of an A being read out as an A, even though it's kind of maybe the settings icon.
Yeah, exactly.
But now though, we're using more and more SVGs, so the scalable vector graphics.
Yeah.
In design and interfaces, and they're really good because they're just XML. They're just code. They're just kind of instructions on how you can draw something. So they scale really nicely. They look wonderful on giant screens and wonderful on tiny screens. But the something that gets missed there is the accessibility again. That you need to label them and you need to give details about them, so that they're understood by various technologies that help people.
Exactly. So I mean, essentially, what you're saying is that, I mean, there's no set standard. I mean, yes, it's more people are moving towards SVGs, but most people aren't there yet. And if you're just an editor on a web page, you're not using SVGs for adding your icons or emojis or whatever. So the complexity of it is actually growing, especially from an accessibility point of view. That understanding it based on context and based on your own experience and your own understanding of the icon, but also, can you even see it? Can you even read it? Do the colors match? Are you colorblind? I mean, how do we even get it right?
Well, I think what you've just said there basically means that you've got to use words, or at least you've got to start with the words and make sure the words are included in all the necessary places.
Yeah.
And you've got to remember that your icon is an add-on. Your icon is something which you're extending the meaning with an icon. You're not replacing the textual description of that function with the icon.
Exactly.
Because as soon as you start taking away the words, then you have lost people. You will cause confusion.
But then we are also saying, because I mean, that constitutes almost, 80% of the apps you download and start up. A lot of them have only icons as their menu bars, which is a huge problem. You can add the accessibility aspect of it, and actually, if you activate screen readers, you can actually touch the icons and have it read to you. But if you don't know how to do that, then you're stuck with an interface with icons that you just have to go through and test and see what they mean.
And also, what's a menu icon? That's one thing I know we talked about before. I mean, just now in front of me as I'm talking to you, I've got 3 dots horizontally. I've got 3 dots vertically. I've got a little arrow pointing downwards. I've got a hamburger I can see over there as well. I mean, without even moving a window on my desktop, I can see like 4 or 5 different things that symbolize.
Yeah.
Because I know, because I've pressed on them before and I've remembered it, they symbolize opening up a menu.
Yeah. And it's sort of like, in the end, you stop caring, but you sort of know where to click.
Well, you click on them all until you find the one that opens up the right thing.
Yeah.
I just hope it doesn't delete something.
So what's our message to all designers out there about doing it and going about this in the correct way?
Never say universal.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone does say universal, then be ready to take up the argument and think about how it might not be universal.
Yeah. And don't test your icons out of context, because that tells you nothing about how they will be used within context.
And always remember text. Text is, you are textually describing things. The icons are not a replacement for that.
But also, I mean, the positive message, you still have fun with them, but with your users, not at your users. I mean, they can create lots and lots of fun stuff as well and make people feel joy. That's what a lot of pictures are for, but do it carefully.
I mean, I know I have a lot of fun with the Slack status icons. Like you can change your icon in Slack to whatever you like. So, in the spring when I'm growing stuff in the garden, I have a carrot. Now during the summer, I've had a kind of big sun hat. So allowing your users to play and to use stuff, to choose things themselves can be a real plus.
So, if you want something to listen to next, you can actually go all the way back to, you found one, episode 31.
Yeah.
Oh, that has to be, it's like long 2012 or something.
Yeah, it's a long time ago. It's 2012. You're right. It's November 2012 when we talked to Derek Featherstone, and we talked to him about infographics.
Yeah.
And how you can make them more accessible.
Scary thing is that's hugely relevant still.
Yeah, I remember that. I think it was you that you'd created an infographic about inclusion or something.
Oh yes.
And I mocked you for the fact that you had created an inaccessible infographic about inclusion or something like that. I'll have to listen back myself and remember the details.
So then, of course, we talked to Derek.
Yeah, who is an expert in accessibility and has been for many decades now. If you can spare a little bit of your time, then you can join our little community of volunteers. We're always looking for help with transcripts and also with publishing. So just get in touch with us anywhere where you can, from email to Twitter or even Facebook or LinkedIn.
Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side.
So, James, why did the man fall down the well?
I don't know, Per. Why did the man fall down the well?
Because he could not see that well.
Oh. Maybe it lacked a text label.